guys, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and this is my 2023 edition of my Top 10 Factions, a smash up. It's been 3 years since I last did my list. We've had Marvel, Disney, a few promos, the 10th anniversary, and excellent movies dudes since then. But more importantly, my thoughts on factions and design principles have evolved extensively. So with this video, I really want to scrutinize each faction I considered to the list, to avoid relying on nostalgia, recency bias, or anything that could influence my decision. In particular, what I call micro blemishes, small things I really wish did or didn't happen, would play a role. With a top 10 list, you don't necessarily want complete volatility, and it will be interesting to see if my list meets the expectation of others. Does it align with what I've been talking about on the channel? Let's find out. My number 10 is the Musketeers, down from number 8 in the last list. While I was scrutinizing Musketeers, I had to ask myself why I like them so much, because they are the opposite of cast-friendly. They have at most one cast-friendly action, but because All for One plays an extra action, you can still play it terminally. And I distinctly remember not liking playing this faction in playtesting because they pass on so many actions. So why do I still like them in 2023? I think it's because, and it's hard not to say this without being conceited, a lot of players play Musketeers incorrectly. I feel like they require finesse, and I like that it makes me feel like I am unlocking potential. Use their abilities to reload, not to chase. If you look at the Musketeers, it's fair to question where the power comes from, and it comes from squeezing out every possible value of their cards and their amplifiers. I think they are very close to being a Death by 1000 Cuts faction, and though that design paradigm can be hard to do well, I do think the Musketeers do it decently well, and they are fun. What will kick them out of the top 10 would be the disappointing minion structure in that they really revolve around two key minions, with Aramis being unfortunate because of the unfortunate history of the word during. Aramis has the ability that feels like it should be usable turn to turn, but the Musketeers have no internal use for it. It's a talent that feels like a reaction that will only trigger once, and I struggle with All for One destroying itself at the end of the turn clause. Why does this clause exist? It's temporary power. So the fact that they are still on the list must be attributed to the fun factor and the puzzle of trying to do more with less. My number 9 is brand new to the list and a very recent addition, and that's Mermaids. Honestly, I'm surprised that Mermaids made it on to the list in spite of many issues that I have with them. Some of their cards just provide crazy value for their slot, but there are some truths I can't escape. I love waste strategies, and I think Mermaids really put those strategies on the map. When I think about faction spaces I want to usurp, where I wish I were in the room, Mermaids come to mind. I also think Siren is a great example of innovating in a space that was previously all or nothing. It's indirect slowdown because the total breakpoint is there, but you aren't fully utilizing everything you have and you may need more to win. That makes it another example of non-movement based waste, and I really like how Mermaids acknowledge that you want to use other players for their power. Key blemishes would be the fact that Charmer is insanely strong for its slot, and Ultimate Song is the most crazy card in recent memory. They can also have some cast problems with their action chaining, but their action chaining is very fun and strong when you pull it off. What I also like about Mermaids is that their elite is relatively straightforward as an ability, and it just works. They also combine more advanced concepts like negative power negation and forced rival plays. For all the concern I have over Ultimate Song being too strong, it is nice to see the game acknowledge that wasting rival plays sometimes means forcing them to play on a base. For Mermaids, there is a lot that I wish they did, including one very major omission, but when you consider how much time they spend in my headspace, they clearly made a mark on me, which is why they are on the list. If I am harsh on Mermaids, it's because I find them super interesting and want them to be perfect, which pushes them down on the list, but not entirely off of it. Number 8 drops off 4 spots from last year, and that is Cyborg Apes. For a faction this old to still be on the list after all this time is phenomenal. I love their game plan of action stacking. Juiced up Flying Monkey is still a classic play with a ton of intrigue. In what order do you build their singularly powerful minion, and which one do you build? One of the appreciations that I like is that they have a lot more flexibility than you think with Cyberback. Cyberback can be its own form of recursion played early, then play Clyde 2.0 terminally to take them back. This lets Cyberback go after the second base rather than the third, and makes them much less scripted. The biggest driver for their fall was the competing interest among their minions. Furious George really needs a different ability. They don't have enough actions to go around. Furious George seems to be discarded more often than they are played, and when played, it's rare that their ability gets triggered by me. Even if the ability is correct in theory, the quantity of them is wrong given the presence of Juiced Up, which wants to build vertically, not horizontally. It has the same problem as Young Musketeers, where you are leaving power on the table, but they have an above-average draw power and recursion can be scary in an instant. Even at 8, they are still a faction I love, and they deserve to be here almost 10 years after their release. My number 7 is Hydra the faction, not the organization. When I playtested Hydra, I knew they had top 10 potential. It was just a question of where, and it turns out that the only thing holding Hydra back is Marvel itself. Hydra the faction is special to me because years before I joked what the Hydra agent would do as a custom faction, and its ability is so iconic that it mirrors exactly what you think it would do. Hydra was the first revisit of 10 plus minions, and it makes self-destruction, which I don't particularly enjoy, a meaningful distinction. Many of their abilities are written cleverly, particularly Red Skull, who splits the talent and ongoing well, instead of tying all the benefits to the talent. They can serve themselves, and they can serve others as well. They would have top 5 potential if they did 2 things I beg for them to do, and they renamed 1 card. Hydra has no antagonism, and for a villain faction that wants to dominate the world, that seems wrong. But more importantly, I really wish there were 2 less Hydra agents and 2 copies of a different minion. I really wanted the Grim Reaper in there for more diversity. What it would do doesn't matter, literally anything else, but I really think that 6 of a minion is too many because you run the risk of wasting the ability of the replacement agents and they just function like bodies. I think Marvel Smash Up really wanted to skew on the simple side, but this is a real opportunity to expand the playstyle of the most interesting Marvel faction, especially since self-destruction was a letdown in many previous attempts like Tricksters and Vampires. And that's one of the best things I can say about Hydra. They make bad factions better, and they are really fun to play. I just want them to be less scripted in terms of always playing for Zolas. Closing out the top half is Halflings, up 3 spots on the previous list. Once again, why do I like Halflings so much when all their minions do the same thing? Why do they move up? They just work, and they are fun. They incentivize the idea of playing from behind, which is so underutilized in this game, and perfect for my playstyle. I still remember fondly the Marvel week of Halflings. There are a few factions that I want to test across the board. You have standout cards in Rude Awakening and Lunch Run. For Rude Awakening in particular, I've long felt that it is much stronger than discarding cards for power, because you get to keep more cards and the payout per card is higher. And if you're worried about using too many minions, you're doing it wrong. They have a range of abilities you'd expect to see in a modern Swarm faction: recursion, sifting, protection, and yet they aren't modern by any means. Halflings intrigue me because they get by on raw printed power, having no internal buffs, and yet they work because they overwhelm, they play from behind. I find it super interesting that you have Howl-type cards in non-Swarm contexts that don't work, and in the context where it would, there is none, yet they still work really well. Perhaps what most interests me is that the Halflings exploit bankable plays and immediate plays to maximize their payout, and even though there is a lot of duplication in their abilities, there is still a puzzle to maximize their value. Moving up 1 space to number 5 is Shapeshifters, who tie cyborg apes for the oldest factions on the list. What amazes me about Shapeshifters is how their minions, all of them, continually remain relevant for 3 distinct reasons. Doppelganger and Gelf give you searching certainty that is even more potent in an age where unique minions are on the rise, unfortunately. Mimics always get excited when you see greater proportions of high-power minions, which again is happening with increasing regularity. Between both of these, the more we break from the standard slotting system, the stronger Shapeshifters become, and the more relevant they remain. But there is also Copycat, which remains dangerous. Not that long ago, Sona said something really profound. I know, I'm surprised too. He said that sometimes factions are drafted to avoid Copycat, and that provides plenty of value. Sometimes Copycat is dead, but other times Copycat was feared, and that provides a lot of fun and intrigue because you are trying to figure out how to maximize a powerful ability that you have 4 copies of. They still have interesting tools of plus power, extra plays, copying, light recursion. Shapeshifter utility took a little bit of a hit when Lion King came out, but I still have a blast every time I play them, and Lion King doesn't bring the same threefold value proposition as Shapeshifters. My number 4 is Superheroes, down 1 spot from the top 3, which is actually a massive win for them. Usually, when a faction I really like gets a Titan, I start to like them less because it shows that the game doesn't understand them like I understand them. Superheroes manage to mostly hold their position, and this is hard to fight off recency bias because my last few superhero games were extremely smooth. However, there is no denying that they have a lot of bad cards. Secret Base, Sidekick, Expanded Power, Awesome Guy. I've had multiple conversations about Justice Friends, where players expect it to be something it just isn't. So why are they still so high on the list? It's the mild-mannered citizen. Every time we see a standout leader, superheroes become relevant. The game seems more and more willing to embrace princess-style structures, which makes them further relevant. Lately, the burst has been doing a ton for them, and maybe it's my recent focus on Come At Me, but they have done really well with it accordingly, and it's giving them a new perspective. The biggest knock against superheroes, which is reflected in the Titan, is the insistence that a recruit can't survive for a turn, and I just found that to be wrong. If putting 2 power on the board is too much power, then what are you supposed to do? 0 to breakpoint everything? I remain unconvinced about the destruction argument, because all the destruction factions got Titans, so destruction must be bad, unless you are killing mild-mannered citizens. If you approach it from an aggro perspective, that has value, and the superheroes can win the war of attrition in my experience, so I definitely think that they get a bad rap, and despite some objectively bad cards, and a Titan with questionable goals, their core value proposition of getting your 5s is what keeps them strong and relevant. If superheroes are number 4, that means that the top 3 have a new entry, and it was really difficult to place the final 3, but climbing 4 spots from last time is Itty Critters. Continuing a major theme on this list, it comes down to relevance. Critter Champion is a leader you simply aren't going to forget. She will always remain relevant. I get excited thinking about who to sling, either terminally or non-terminally. Just think of the power 2s we got since the last list. Hydra Agents and Zolas, who can provide even more power. Our Critter Coach can sling a Lion Club, who can replace itself with the next Critter Coach. Sirens are an impact loss of power that creates swings without slowing the game down. Watson, with its dual focus, can be slung both terminally and non-terminally, but in different use cases. And the best thing about Itties is that there aren't many micro-blemishes. I do wish the coaches and champions were more different, rather than the champion being clearly better, but many of us feel that this is a necessary evil. The strongest statement I can make about Itty Critters is that the champion should have been the leader of the world champions. This is an amazing place to start building a unique minion faction, and I remain incredibly disappointed that she wasn't. If you were to tell me that Itty Critters were your number 1, it would make perfect sense. It just happens that I currently hold the other 2 in extremely high regard. But at least one notable faction has come off the list, so are we in for more surprises? Number 2 is not a surprise. Holding the line is Anansi Tales. Same message, different faction. Relevance. Anansi slinging actions is always relevant. Some players call Anansi Tales top-heavy because Anansi is so crucial, but this faction has incredible draw and consistency. Here's the best part. Anansi face considerable scrutiny. They have a minion who really drops the ball for me. Their entire mechanic can be turned into a gimmick and plus power. And despite that, they are still here. And the greatest thing I can say about Anansi is that they really make bad factions work. When I am struggling with a new faction, I give them Anansi because it feels like Anansi can make anything fun. And they are uniquely suited to do so because they have the tools to get the exact cards you need and the ability to give away the ones you don't. You can play this faction multiple ways, and all of them are intriguing. You can flood players with bad cards and force them to discard them. You can bait players with trying to sneak through good cards. You can give them analysis paralysis and make them wait, only to reclaim your cards again. It even makes madness relevant. For this and many other reasons, Anansi is still an amazing faction, even despite the issues I have with their gimmick potential design. Despite those issues, I'm really proud of how Anansi evolved, and seeing the Hornets tie the faction together from what they were, they are really special to me. But it wasn't enough to dethrone what remains number 1, Rockstars. When it comes to Rockstars, what are the negatives? Some say they are too strong, but what would you change? If anything, I hate the classic Rocker Claws, because I don't like building minions that way, in a way that they block each other. With the recent trend of strength plus factions, maybe Rockstars are the actual baseline where factions should have been all along. The only card I'd really change is Total Sellout, where the 21-ness doesn't really make a difference. A 1-3 split would have been much better. But this faction is just strong, fun, and most importantly, consistent. They have scripting tendencies, but aren't scripted. They have game plans beyond groupies. Their cards are great internally and externally. They do so many things well. In trying to describe why I like them, I thought about an off-the-wall analogy I recently made in a video game context. To me, Rockstars are like chicken tenders. They aren't fancy or flashy, and they seem super basic, but they are just an example of executing well. They're my comfort food that I order all the time, easy to understand, universally appealing, and hard to screw up. I recently watched a video about a famous chef who makes these intricate foods, but still loves the simplicity of chicken tenders, and there is a place for both in his life. That's how I feel about Rockstars. Elegant simplicity and pure fun. When you build Rockstar combos, you get so many tools and a great head start. It's easy to forget that they are first and foremost a draw faction. Their movement faction is definitely underrated, and they can go toe-to-toe with some of the best combos in the game. If Smash Up had a clear baseline, the strength argument would go away largely, and what you'd be left with is just a textbook masterpiece in my opinion. Even Turn It Up to 11 has its moments. It's less about reaching 21 and more about the stall. Play them for a simple groupie play or the puzzly movement. Rockstars will work either way, and that is why they remain my number one after all this time. Comparing this to last year's list, we lost Ancient Egyptians and Elves. The 10th spot is always going to be volatile, but losing Elves hurt. Even though they are still really high, definitely top 15. Maybe I'll go into that some other time. Do any of my listings surprise you? Which factions do you think would be on my list? Any surprise omissions? And who are your top 10? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.